Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second of Chatham House's series of events marking our centenary week. I'm Robert Niblett, the director of Chatham House, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, to join us today for what should be a very interesting conversation about the topic of inclusive governance and sustainable development, that combination. And the reason we're so pleased not just to have him with us today, but also to be having this conversation is that we are, as Chatham House, making as one of our second century goals the whole issue of more inclusive and accountable governance. And with that in mind, to be able to discuss with him today specifically the topic of how you bridge the divide between local and international action strikes us as especially important. As we know, most of international affairs work on multilateral initiatives, focuses on big aid packages, the G20's debt relief, the 0.7 targets of GDP, 0.7% target of GDP for foreign aid, some of the big infrastructure projects that are taking place around the world. But the positive impacts of development are crucially connected to local context and local implementation, whether this connects into the climate impacts of development, whether it's the role of women in development. We really want to think about how governance models can change so that we can engage more local involvement in the process of sustainable development, both in the execution and in the implementation and in the design. And this means engaging civil society actors, private sector, but also some of the more marginalized parts of international society who are not involved in developing sustainable development as they would like to do. And as I said, we are absolutely delighted to have Ban Ki-moon with us here today, all the way from Seoul. Mr. Ban, great to have you with us. As I think you all know, he was Secretary General of the UN from 2007 to 2016. And he has become the Deputy Chairman of the Elders, that very notable group of former world leaders that was kicked off around the time of Nelson Mandela. Kofi Annan was involved in it as well. And to have you with us today, both in your role as former Secretary General of the UN, but also importantly, as somebody who understands the delivery of complex policy solutions as former Foreign Secretary of South Korea. As Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon focused on the launch of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. He put a very heavy focus on climate change, and he also helped launch the UN Women program of initiatives, as well as being a big supporter of universal health care, another area also of Chatham House focus in our centenary. After inviting former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to say some words to set the scene on this topic. Just to let you know, we will be engaging some of you who can join us in conversation. Could I please encourage you to type any Q&A questions that you have, any questions into our Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page. I'm sure you are all very experienced on doing this now. So if you go to the Q&A function, just type in your note there. If you would like to ask the question in person, then feel free to say so in the Q&A, and then we can always call on you to unmute your microphone so you can ask the question in person. Otherwise, I will moderate the questions that I pick up as I see them coming along. So once again, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Mr. Ban, wonderful to have you with us today for our centenary week. This is the second in the series of special events that we're doing this week to mark 100 years since our founding in 1920. And we really can think of no one better to address this big issue of inclusive governance and bridging local and international action. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robin Niblett, the director of the Chatham House. First of all, my warmest congratulations on the centenary anniversary of this Chatham House. It's a great honor to commemorate this occasion through this webinar, but I have been participating once with the Chatham House as a Secretary General, and this is my I think, a second time, this time through webinar. For the past 100 years, Chatham House has performed a valuable service to the whole world as a center for independent thinking, thorough research, and perhaps most importantly, constructive dialogue in an atmosphere of mutual trust and respect. In fact, you have made many important subjects like local versus global, and also official versus civil society, etc. I have been always speaking out that there is no difference between local and global. Local is global and global is local. And without any support of civil society, no country, no leaders can perform their visions smoothly. This is why I think continuous dialogue between academic research institute like Chatham House and also just many type of civil society is very important for the work of the United Nations. Now, more than ever, we need the values of Chatham House at the center of public life and discourse. COVID-19 has shown a light on the acute vulnerabilities of our interconnected world. No country can tackle this kind of global challenges without having full cooperation and solidarity, and also sense of compassion for other people. Now, digital technology offers many positive ways, as we are now fully utilizing it to facilitate this kind of cooperation and dialogue and the transparency. Webinars, video conferences, and other online platforms can play a significant role in maintaining a global conversation about the global problems and in holding leaders and their advisors accountable. At the same time, we all need to be vigilant about the risks posed to peace, democracy, and public health by the rising amount of hate speech or fake news, like disinformation in a gentle way, amplified via social media and the internet during the time of crisis, sometimes as deliberate state propaganda, and sometimes as a cynical clickbait designed to maximize revenue for digital platform and providers. This vigilance is all the more important amid the current global climate of populist isolationism, nationalism, disregard of international law and rule, and abandonment of the key treaties and institutional governance and the mechanisms. As everybody is aware, 2020 is not only 100th anniversary of Chatham House, but 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. As a former Secretary General, this has much more importance and meaning and reflections. Then between the birth of Chatham House and the United Nations, there are 25 years of difference. Those intervening 25 years, from 1920 to 1945, serve as a reminder to all of us the terrible consequences of failures of multilateralism. First World War and Second World War, all this happened. Faced then, as now, with a devastating pandemic, growing nationalism, systemic racism, and profound economic inequalities, too few of the leaders of 1920 had the courage or wisdom to tackle these threats collectively. Rather, they retreated into narrow nationalism, tried to maintain unsustainable and unjustifiable colonial empires, and indulged in punitive posturing toward former adversaries. In 1945, it seemed as if the world had finally learn the lessons of past mistakes. The United Nations was created, in the words of the Charter, I quote, to save the world from the scourge of war, unquote, and pursue peaceful and inclusive path to global prosperity and democracy. Cynics might argue that the fact that war, inequality, discrimination, and poverty have not been vanquished over the past 75 years means that United Nations may be a costly failure. I vehemently disregard and disagree. If anybody, a lot of people, even during my time as a Secretary General, they asked, is the United Nations still necessary? My answer was that if we have to, whatever the reasons may be, have to disband the United Nations, then we will have to create another United Nations tomorrow. So without United Nations and without such a global body like the United Nations, I think it will be very much difficult to handle all these problems. Where the United Nations has failed, I would argue that this has been because of the member states, particularly, but not least, exclusively, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. It has been very rare that all these 5 countries were able to have a full agreement on even sometimes purely humanitarian issues. As you may remember, as you may agree, that the Security Council has not been able to issue any statement or any resolution on this COVID-19 crisis. During my time in 2014, when Ebola pandemic happened, I think just one day, it took just one day that they declared that it was serious threat to the maintenance of international peace and security. But because of political difference between China and the United States, this is not the case now. Then there are many such issues like climate change, in particular, which is an existential threat that can only be solved through collaborative action among all the countries around the world. That is why the multilateral instrument and processes created to tackle climate change, including the Paris Climate Change Agreement of 2015 and the broader UN Sustainable Development Goals, with the 17 goals that needs to be informed by a sense of climate justice. The countries and peoples who have contributed the least to the global warming are paying the highest price. They have done anything wrong, but it's mostly industrialized countries who have done wrong to this climate, I think, our planet Earth. Then it is what we call injustice. So my good friend and chairperson of Mary Robinson has created her own foundation of climate justice. Now, country like the United Kingdom, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, one of the architects of international order, a significant player in the global economy, and the president of the next COP next year, even though it was due this year, but it is not possible, has a particular responsibility to show leadership and set the global example on climate justice. Back in 2019, last year, I expressed my concern, in fact, about the role played by the UK export finance in funding fossil fuel project overseas, even when the UK government was proclaiming its success domestically in moving away from coal-generated powers. I called on then Prime Minister Theresa May to recalibrate the UK's export finance policy so it is fully consistent with international climate trends and the obligations. And I repeat it today even to Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I know that many people across the United Kingdom, in government, development administration, and businesses, academia, and the think tank community had been working hard to ensure a successful COP26 summit in Glasgow this November. COVID-19 has forced the summit's postponement to 2021, but there must be no diminution of the UK's ambition and efforts to secure meaningful outcomes that put the world finally on track to meet the target of keeping the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, as was recommended strongly by IPCC October 2018. This must mean listening and learning from activists at the local level and providing a platform via the medium of digital technology. So these lessons can be translated into international action plans. In conclusion, Dr. Neblett, I'd like to remind you of some wise words from my dearly missed colleague and my predecessor of the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan. He described the existential challenges facing our world, from climate change to nuclear proliferation to terrorism, racism, and economic injustice as, quote, problems without passports, like a virus, a coronavirus. We cannot solve these problems if we retreat behind our own borders, obsess about definitions of sovereignty, or indulge in specious rhetoric about national greatness. COVID-19 is a somber reminder of our common human bonds and vulnerabilities. We will dishonor as victims unless we respond to the pandemic and our shared threats with a renewed sense of solidarity and collective action. This is my just beginning brief remarks, but I'll be very happy to engage in dialogue with you and the students.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ban. Thank you for those very thoughtful remarks, for the quite appropriate reminder of this being the UN's 75th anniversary as well. And I think especially important that you noted what was it that happened between that period of 1920 and 1945. It was the failure of the League of Nations, an idea that was helped, curated and so on, and then the rediscovery, as you said, of a new system of international governance built around the UN, which for all of its failings, as you said, would almost need to be reinvented to deal with these problems without passports, to quote your predecessor, Kofi Annan. Thank you for these very important remarks. Also for bringing up some of the more pressing current issues, not just the issue of climate change, but importantly, the issue of hate speech, disinformation, the way this is feeding into populism. And as you said, the particularly strong reminders right now of injustice, not just in developing parts of the world that are afflicted by ubiquitous poverty, but also in some of the more developed countries around the world, as we've seen in the UK and the US and around Europe in recent weeks. So I think a particularly important set of remarks. We've got quite a few questions coming in. I will pose some of them to you in a minute. Though we did want to, one of the questions I wanted to bring in was a comment also from Sana Thyssen, who's a member of the Chatham House Common Futures Conversations. Before I turn to Sana, though, let me just, Sana, good to have you with us. Before I turn to Sana, let me just ask you one specific question, Mr. Ban, which is about the role of the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights, because it does strike me that this is a time where you focused on the limits of governments and what governments can achieve, but the UN did have in its founding this idea of the rights of individuals. And I can think of no more important way of thinking of bottom-up than thinking about the rights of individuals, which were enshrined in that UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Could you say where you think that stands right now? We look at the UN Human Rights Council. It does not seem to bear a resemblance to somebody like me looking on the outside to the values that are upheld in that Universal Declaration. There seems to be a dichotomy. Now that you're no longer Secretary General, maybe you could share your thoughts on that. And then after that, I'm going to turn to Sana, our colleague there, for an intervention. But first, back to you, Ban Ki-moon.
Thank you very much. That's a very important question. When I became Secretary General by January 2017, we had already transformed from Human Rights Commission to Human Rights Council. In fact, there had been a strong criticism from international community, particularly countries like the United States and many European countries, that Human Rights Commission had become very much politicized, and by particularly some those countries, the composition and role of the Human Rights Commission was very much criticized. Then they decided through many long, heated discussions to reform this commission and creating Human Rights Council. We hope that Human Rights Council was less politicized by a certain group of countries, but it was almost the same things. That is why unfortunately, American government, United States, has been in and out of this Human Rights Council. When I became the Secretary General, I have strongly advised duly elected President Obama and his administration, and I had in-depth discussions with Ambassador Susan Rice, etc., that if I know that he was not satisfied with the Human Rights Council, but Human Rights Council was created upon a strong urge. Then if you speak out outside of the council, then I think whatever your concern may be, your concern may not be addressed. You have a concern, then come in, join the council and speak out there as a member of the council. Everybody will welcome. Normally these council members are elected, but I'm sure that you will have no problem to be elected. Then, in fact, President Obama accepted my recommendation and they joined. Then there's some very serious issues between Arab countries and Israel, and all these human rights of the Palestinians and Israeli issues. And then, unfortunately, the President Trump administration has decided to withdraw from this Human Rights Council. This is very sad. Now, apart from this one, then my policy has been human rights should be upheld the highest priority. As you know, Charter of the United Nations, basic three principles of United Nations Charter, peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. Now, which are more important? I think they are all equally important. But in reality, if there is no peace and security, you cannot guarantee, you cannot promote human rights. And even you cannot engage in sustainable development. Nobody can engage in their productive activities. And then in normal countries, without economic development, no political leaders can sustain their political power. They can easily be voted out in the next election. So peace and security, economic development should go hand in hand altogether. Now, what about, there are some countries who seemingly seem to be very peaceful, and economic development are going well, but where people's voice has not been much heard. That means when there is no human right, human dignity respected, and then peace and security and economic development may not mean anything. So I've been speaking out that human rights should be upheld first. Learning from very serious and tragic lessons from our Sri Lankan tragedy, where United Nations was not able to perform their proper role during the crisis. And then in 2011, we created the Human Rights Upfront, HRUF, Human Rights Upfront. Human rights should always be upfronted on top of peace and security, and even during the time of conflict, human dignity and human rights must be protected. That is number one goal. Then what about in reality, when there is a war, in front of the gun barrels, you cannot claim the human right. But we will say human justice will follow. Then there is a justice issue. I've been speaking out that justice will be there. If not today, tomorrow. If not tomorrow, surely day after tomorrow, or nearest the future. This is what we are now seeing. We have established a lot of tribunals, special tribunals, and prosecutors, and this is what we see in many countries. So, as far as human rights is concerned, I am the most committed. This is what the elders group, they take human rights the most. Yeah.
Thank you very much for underscoring the importance of it. As you said, there is the dilemma of, is it peace and security and economic development first and then human rights? We hear some people talk about human rights as being economic rights first and then other political rights second. I think, as you explained here, it's very hard to divide them, and I think the terminology that was developed by you and your Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson about human rights up front, which you referenced there, I thought was a very clever way of putting its centrality. Let me bring in some younger voices, as this is also meant to be inclusive governance, is about being inclusive of perspectives as well as nationalities. And I'm thrilled that we have Sanna Thyssen with us. Sanna is, since February, a member of the Chatham House Common Futures Conversations Initiative, bringing young voices from across Europe and Africa together to talk about their common challenges. I think importantly, she's somebody who has demonstrated her own drive to bring about change, having established the Shake the Dust Young People's Organization, which is all about youth participation in sexual and reproductive rights and health. And I think, Sanna, you've also been doing stuff under lockdown. Somebody told me you've set up a new Stories to Action initiative. So, Sanna, why don't you just share your thoughts and a question, please, for Ban Ki-moon when you're ready. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and to be speaking with you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. As already mentioned, over the past months, I've been engaging in the Common Futures Conversations, and with a great team, we established an idea in terms of youth participation and youth representation. And so my team consists of Monter, who's in Tunisia, we have Michelle, who's in Italy, and Gift in Kenya. And together, what we were actually brainstorming was that a lot of the youth networks and constituencies are informally formed. And what we saw from our own experiences is that they therefore are very often overlooked and undervalued by more formal institutions, governments, and different bodies. So our idea centered on trying to integrate these informal networks within more formal bodies. So we proposed a structure where a number of young people would be formally appointed within government ministries and agencies, and in their positions they would actually be engaging in much of the activities that happen within these bodies. So proposing policy recommendations, attending different meetings, even representing the government. And in order to actually get the informal, the wider, broader youth networks engaged, we also proposed that they would be supported by a selected network of formal and informal youth-led movements that actually represent the diversities that exist among young people. So this would include the geographic spread, the cultural backgrounds, academic backgrounds, even the marginalized groups, in their position, they would actually form a sounding board for these young people within these bodies, and also trying to, gather opinions within their own communities and feed this into these youth representatives, and also bringing forward key concerns that exist among young people in their own context. And then the last aspect of our idea would be that we also know that a lot of action is really needs to happen very fast. So in terms of that, what we were thinking was also to appoint a smaller board that could actually provide direct on-the-spot proposals to these different young people. So this could be in the case of, an urgent meeting popping up or an urgent proposal that needs to be put forward, and that these young representatives still have some kind of backing from young people and from a different youth movement than themselves. So given this idea, what we did have a question for you, sir, is how could initiatives such as your own with the elders actually join forces with projects such as the Common Futures Conversation in order to bridge the divide between local and international action?
Thank you very much, Sana. And maybe I'll Michelle, and we've also got another member of our Common Futures Conversation, Michelle Alimasi, who's with us as well. But Michelle, do you have the same question or a different question?
Well, my question was very much similar to the one of Sana, but
well, in that case, just hold on a second, Secretary, Mr. Ban. What I'll do is let me let both of my colleagues, Sana Thyssen and Michelle Alimasi, both put their questions together, and then you can answer them together. And I would just introduce Michelle quickly by saying that he was one of the founding members of our Common Futures Conversation way back in 2018. Michelle, maybe you could tell us where you're joining us from, because I think Sana is in the Netherlands, and I don't know where you're joining us from, Michelle. Why don't you tell us where you're calling in from?
Sure. I'm from Italy, and actually, like 5 years ago, I had the pleasure to meet Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in New York during the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. And my question is starting from that particular moment. In that occasion, you, Ban Ki-moon, you said, you young people, you are the last generation that can end the climate change crisis, and you are the first generation that can achieve the ending of global poverty. 5 years later, and here is the connection with the proposal of Sana, how to join the forces of the elders and initiatives such as Common Futures Conversations. After 5 years, is still relevant your call to young people, or now it's time to making a shift from being youth as the future to coming to be youth as present agent of action? Thank you.
Sana and Michelle, thank you very much for your very good question. I think Sana mentioned at length about the sort of inclusivity, including the youth empowerment. I think Michelle's question is focusing on youth issues. Now, when the United Nations was created, as you may know, just after the Second World War, this was mainly focusing on how the nations would contribute to maintaining the peace and the prosperity. So most of the work had been done between and among the nations. But as we progress into 20th and 21st century, people realize that it is not only the national government leaders, political leaders. We need to have a partnership with the business community. We need to have a partnership with civil society. Then we need to have a participation of women and young people. And there are many people by how they look and how they were born. Then they have been discriminated. So it is the sort of not to discriminate, to have everybody on board our process. This has been much, much more lifted during my time as a Secretary General. Can you believe that from 1945 to 1992, 47 years, 47 years, there were only 3 women, senior staff in UN. And nobody paid attention to young people. So I thought that somehow, without fully utilizing and engaging the women's participation, women's power, women's potential, whose numbers are even more than men, more than half of the global population are women, and half the global population are under the age of 25, boys or girls. That means 75% of the whole this world population are either women or young people. That includes boys, men. So how to fully utilize these very valuable elements and resources? The first thing was that in 2010, I created for the first time the UN Women. That's a super agency, empowering and empowering women's potential, women's ability. I have been reaching out to many business communities. Then I have been reaching out to many educational leaders to teach more girls and more women. I appointed Michelle Bachelet, who was the former president of Chile, as a head of UN Women. And then in 2011, I thought that without having young people joining and empowering young people, then we would not be able to do all this climate or whatever, sustainable development. At the time, there was no sustainable development, the Millennium Development Goals. Then I appointed, as you may remember, Mohammed Al-Hendawi. He was 28 years old. There were many young people applied for this as a special envoy of Secretary General on youth. It was again first institution that I established. Mohammed Al-Hendawi is now Secretary General of World Scout Federation. He is now, and his successor is a Sri Lankan lady. I forgot her lady. She was not my appointment. She's also a Sri Lankan young lady who is taking charge of youth empowerment. So this is what I have been working very hard. And then there is an issue of quality education and for women and young people. There are still many young people, more than 62 million young people who are not able to go to school. So Sustainable Development Goals are now very clearly focusing on empowering women. Now, empowering women is number 5 goals of Sustainable Development Goals. I think equality among sexes, and there are many people, who have different sexual orientations. It was during my time, that this issue has just been exposed. When I became Secretary General, I knew that there were many UN staff who were just working and living under the shadow and who were not able to come out, speaking out. Then I just brought them. And I declared to my staff that I will make the United Nations as the best workplace where people with different sexual orientation will be able to work. Then there was strong pushback from conservative countries like mostly Arab countries, and they were, I made it that there is a family allowance when men and women live together as a couple, but when they are sort of lesbians or gays, then they have not been able to given this benefit. The UN's position was that if a country of that country, and if a country of that person respect this different sexual orientation, then we respect it. But during my time, I abolished that kind of thing and enhanced that whether once a homeland country respect this sexual orientation or not, United Nations will give full equality, complete full equality. And this is what I have been working. This is the inclusivity, multilateralism, and inclusivity. Inclusivity can cover various aspects. Philosophically speaking, we the people, in the Charter of the United Nations. Most important development of recent years has been remarkable growth in scale and influence of cross-border civil society. Now, I know that there is even a demand from the international community that there should be an Under-Secretary General's Department for Civil Society. I think I would support it, even though I do not have any power now. If I were still Secretary General, I would have strong support on this, establishing a dedicated department on empowering civil societies. Yeah.
So incredibly important different dimensions here, and we've got so many questions coming in, and we've only got sort of 15-20 minutes to go. So I'm going to say thank you very much for answering those two questions. Your point about a formal role for civil society is incredibly important. I think if we could find a way, and maybe something the Common Futures conversation should be encouraging, to, and maybe in teaming up with the elders, as both Michelle and Sana recommended, to make a big push for stronger youth voices actually in agencies, formalizing almost that process of drawing new ideas in. I think it'd be an incredibly good idea. So I think, Sana and Michelle, you've got a good idea to be taking forward during your time in CFC, and let's see if we can get it into the system and get it embedded in the way that the focus on women now is so clearly across the UN. Look, we've got a number of questions, and I'm going to tell my colleagues here, maybe you could see if we can get Duncan Bartlett to get on camera, or at least to be unmuted, Amrit, Duncan Bartlett, because Mr. Ban, there were 2 or 3 questions just to get to the core nub of it, and they're at the top of the list that have been voted to the top about the perennial question of the veto wielding aspect of the UN. And you yourself mentioned, I think in your remarks, the failure of the UN to be able to address the issue of vetoes around the question of Syria. And this issue has been raised in a number of the questions we've had here. Is there any prospect, if not of removing the veto, of finding ways to work around it? And what experience do you have in there? Duncan, you were going to ask some version of this question. Let me invite Duncan Bartlett to make his comment. Duncan.
Thank you very much. My name is Duncan Bartlett. I'm the editor of Asian Affairs magazine. You expressed your frustration in your opening remarks about the situation in the Security Council of the United Nations at present. And you said that you noted that it had been unable to offer a resolution on the COVID-19 crisis. Do you think that it's time to reform the membership of the United Nations Security Council?
That's a very important question, but very difficult for me to answer, not to be able to give you any clear answer as a former Secretary General. That has been the most, very difficult moment whenever I had been asked this question. This has been a long-held, aspiration of member states of the United Nations. But somehow, as a result of Second World War, terrible tragedies, they seem to have agreed that there should be a very effective, decision-making power, which can be implementable. forcibly implementable. That is why they created the permanent members of the Security Council. In fact, any resolution of the General Assembly is just a recommendation, advisory recommendation. Therefore, it doesn't have any power, any force to be implemented, while only Security Council resolutions are. A lot of discussions have been made. There have been many aspirants. Like in Africa, in fact, there is not a single country is represented for this among P5, and nobody from Latin America. Therefore, you can understand such a huge pushback from those countries. Therefore, the UN has taken this as one of the very serious issues, but the discussions has been always very, very slow. They first established some sort of a working groups, which didn't have anything. Then this idea, this item has been picked up by the General Assembly itself. The General Assembly has been making a lot of discussions, but so far it is because of the lack of political will among P5. According to regulations, any such decision should have a full 5 permanent members concurrent vote. But I don't think no country is willing to give up that power. Then countries like France or United States, they have been very generous, saying that the Security Council should be expanded with even veto powers. But it has been mostly lip service. They knew that. They knew that even though they would support a certain country's permanent membership, there will be some natural enemy country who will veto it. So it is quite very easy political promise. But I'm afraid that I'm disappointed deeply that not a single decision has been made by the Security Council on COVID-19. While more than 12 million people have been contracted and more than 500,000 people have been dead, but because of the dispute between the United States and China, they have never been able to agree on any single resolution. One should learn from the lessons Ebola case in 2014. It took just one day by Security Council. They declared it is a serious threat to maintenance of international peace and security. What's wrong? That why they are not able to agree to make some solidified action? But this may not be my answer, but my answer to your direct question, my direct question is, at this time, there may not be a possibility of any agreement on reform of the Security Council, expanding the permanent membership with the veto power. Without veto power, there may be some possibility that expansion of permanent members without this veto power. But other than that, I don't have any hope.
Yeah, and I think some of the proposals, Mr. Banda, be made as to whether the veto could be removed or given up for certain types of issues like declarations. You mentioned Ebola. Of course, it was easier on Ebola because it was happening in Africa, so it was possible for the permanent members to approve it. But obviously, as you well know, the source of the coronavirus has made it a political issue. So maybe there's some other ideas out there. I'm conscious we've only got 8 minutes left. I'm sorry, you wanted to come in, Mr. Ban, yes?
Just briefly about this. French government was very persistently pushing this idea when it comes to absolutely humanitarian crisis. And then veto wielding power should, not exercise this veto power. But there has been support by some countries, but basically they were not willing to support this kind of any changes to
right. Well, maybe this is a movement for future to make. We've got, I want to bring in Siddhartha Sarma into this call here. She's got, I think, an interesting question about South Asia in particular. Siddhartha, I think you're there. Could you be unmuted? Or yeah, thank you. Siddhartha, could you ask your question, please?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Boone, for taking the question. And my question is regarding this region's water treaty policies, which is about with the recent escalation in the region of the conflicts between India and China and India and Pakistan. We have a lot of water treaties between the four countries, India, Bhutan, China, and Pakistan. Now, with given so much of conflict, these water treaties are mere paper policies, and they will tend to become myopic ones. So, in your opinion, how can local communities contribute to inclusive, sustainable governance policies in terms of natural resources? Because these are problems not just in South Asia, but in Africa as well. So how can local communities take action to counter climate change related issues and issues regarding water policy so that we can have a better world tomorrow?
Thank you, Siddhartha. Over to you, Mr. Mann.
Yeah, Siddhartha, that's again very important question, but difficult. It should not be difficult, in fact. It's not like a veto, power issues. When it comes to India, Pakistan, they are both nuclear power states. When it comes to India, China, the relationship dispute, again, they are both nuclear power states, and they are very important countries, particularly when it comes to India and Pakistan in Southeast Asia. Because of this long-standing dispute, the United Nations has been deploying UN peacekeeping. It's not peacekeeping, but peace observer mission. But unfortunately, Indian government has not been rendering any support to this United Nations observer mission until now. This is a source of regret for me as a Secretary General. And while they occasionally had engaged in peace talks at the very senior levels, but somehow it has not been able to do that. And United Nations has not been fully and effectively engaging in to implement their observing mandate. Which has been given by the Security Council because of just a unilateral boycott of support. So though UN observer mission has been able to observe the Indian side of this borderline, only Pakistan side. That's what I really regret very much as a Secretary General. And we've been discussing this matter, but they are not willing to engage in dialogue, first of all. And most recently, we have been really very much concerned about the dispute between India and China. I hope that those two countries should really bear their responsibility as very important regional and global powers, and also nuclear power states. This is what I'm really asking. One should look at the, longer vision rather than their only national vision. We are living in a very small planet Earth. So we have been affected by climate change, and there are many global challenges which we have to really solidify our limited resources. I think climate change comes number one, most important and urgent issue. Now, India and Pakistan and China, they have been wholeheartedly supporting this climate issues, but still, this having some potentially explosive political issues not resolved, it will always be in a very much unstable situation in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
I think such an important question, Siddhartha, and as Dr. Ban was describing how difficult it's going to be to try to overcome it, one would hope, given the water relationships, as you were mentioning, between China and India in particular. I think, Mr. Ban, you've dealt with this when you were Secretary General. That could become a real flashpoint in the future, not just the unregulated border between the two countries, but the fear over blockages of water supply. So hopefully, I think it's a good reminder also to Chatham House to make sure we're able to combine this focus on resource management, environmental stewardship, and ways of promoting peace and stability, because there's a connection there where maybe you can get people to work towards common interests in ways that is very hard to do when you talk about things like borders. You know, borders bring out all of those atavistic concerns. We don't have much time left for many more questions. I did want to get a question in, because I think it's very relevant, actually, Mr. Ban, from John Nilsson Wright, the senior fellow in our Asia program, who does a lot of our work on Korea and the Korean Peninsula. I think he has an interesting question to ask you. John, please unmute and let's hear your question.
Thank you, Robin. Dr. Ban, echoing your earlier remarks at the beginning of your presentation about the connection between the global and the local, I'm reminded of former US House Speaker Tip O'Neill's own famous phrase, all politics is local. And I think about the experience of South Korea and those dramatic candlelit processions, the candlelit demonstrations that led to a dramatic political change in South Korea. What lessons do you think can be learnt from the South Korean experience of participatory democracy, particularly as a basis for challenging authoritarianism, and also, very importantly, managing the balance between representative democracy and direct participatory democracy? How can South Korea's example be a lesson to other countries that are grappling with these questions at a time of rising populism? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for raising this very important I, as a Korean, am very much proud that Korea has something to extend, to show, as well as share with some countries where still the people are not fully able to fully engage in their activities without any political fear or operations. Of course, democratic rules and values. This is a basic and fundamental principle of the United Nations Charter. I think when you can, there are some countries where the people can seemingly enjoy their economic engagement, some prosperity, but when there is no freedom of speech or no freedom of assembly, then it will be a very difficult society. Korea started because of our dire security, very serious security issues confronting each other between South and North Korea, and surrounded by many big powers, and also having experienced this terrible Korean War in 1950. In fact, Korea, I can tell you that Korea is still in the state of war. Even though there may not be some exchange of fires, but North Korea is heavily militarized and very much dictatorial, one-man rule, countries. While Korean government, during these successive administrations, we have gone through very dictatorial to very full-blown diplomacy, but that was not free. A lot of students, a lot of civil society freedom fighters, they had to be sacrificed. Either they have been killed by military regimes, but upon this kind of things, and with fully engaging with the international community, and with growing awareness on the importance of human rights and values and democratic values and principles, then all Korean people are fully enjoying this freedom of speeches and assembly. Sometimes it may look disorderly. People are speaking out against the government and against their employers, etc., etc. So civil society is very strong, and Korean government, no leader, no political leader can effectively carry on one's mandate without fully engaging in labor unions and civil societies, and without engaging women and youth group. So this is something which Korea can really share with many countries where the situation may not be the same. So it is very important, first of all, the political leaders and the business leaders, they should have a clear sense of, and based on democratic values and principle, the human right. Then I think that there can be slow changes, and there should be full support from international community, United Nations, Human Rights Council, and United Nations special agencies, and there are many human rights watches, international human rights groups. I think their voices also helped Korea to democratize, and we have been the target of criticism by Human Rights Watch, all these humanitarian and human rights groups.
Just a last question to you, Secretary General Ban, because we have gone a little bit over time, but we've got most of our audience are still with us because this is an important discussion. And I think one area we haven't had time to get into enough, but I think I want to finish with this as the last question. I'm picking up a couple here, which is really about the role of business. We had a very important meeting recently, the summit of UN Global Compact members with Angela Merkel, the presidents of Botswana, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, many CEOs, all focused on the role of business and the private sector and private capital driving positive change, and they committed to in the areas of health, inequality, and climate change. And I wonder if you could finish up in your last remarks by saying something about the role of business, because obviously the UN Global Compact, started by Kofi Annan, taken very strongly by you, now by Secretary General Guterres. Business seems to me to be going beyond where governments go in many cases. There are new alliances being formed between business leaders and civil society. In many cases, businesses are listening more closely to the local and the communities than the governments are. So could you say something about the kind of partnerships you think, Mark Moody-Stewart and Lee Dan were two people who asked this question. What do you think would be, how positive are you about the role of business in helping drive more local and accountable and inclusive change in the UN system?
That's again very important tools and means to make sure that the climate change and sustainable development goals are implemented. Number 17, goal number 17 is about partnership, global partnership. After discussing all 16 very important goals, the member states agree that without establishing fully committed partnership among government, business community, and civil society, this tripartite partnership is most important tools and means of addressing all global challenges, including climate change. In that regard, I am very much grateful for the foresight of my predecessor, Kofi Annan, who initiated this global compact, UN Global Compact. As soon as these Millennium Development Goals were adopted by the member state, I think he went to Davos Forum and proposed to the business community that we establish a global UN Global Compact, where we expected that business communities, business leaders should render, should be part of this MDG at the time. Now they are part of SDGs now. And I'm also proud to tell you that I have prioritized the strengthening much, much more this about the UN Global Compact. When I assumed my job in 2007, it was just the 7th year of this Global Compact, but during my time of 10 years, I have expanded, I think, to almost the current size of more than 15,000 global business firms, big and small and medium. My strong argument and pitch was that without the full participation and support of business communities, nothing can be done, nothing can be achieved. Because most of the global emissions are coming from industrial sectors. And most of the fund, they mobilize trillions of dollars. I think even Samsung company, I think they mobilize a much bigger budget than Korean government. So this is something one big global company can mobilize such a funding. Now I'm also proud that even after my retirement, I'm still working as honorary chairman of the UN Global Compact Korea Network. I'm also very closely engaged in Korean Global Compact. And I have also established, while traveling many countries, even in Myanmar and in several African countries, I have established ULI, a global compact, even though I know that their economic situation were not strong, but having mindset among business leaders that they are part of this process is very important. Then, there are many big companies like Coca-Cola, Nestle, etc., Ford. So global companies, they show the principles, the 10 principles of UN Global Compact. In fact, the 10 principles constitute all the big principles of the United Nations and United Nations Charter, starting from human rights, gender empowerment, and peaceful resolution of all these labor issues and global health issues. There are very important elements and principles which UN Global Compact comprise of. And with the Global Compact successfully engaging, continuously engaging, I think we'll have a better prospect of fulfilling the visions of Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much for those comments, and I think it is a good place to finish. I'm conscious that I have not managed to get through, definitely not all, and not even half of the questions we received. There were so many in the question line. I hope participants had a chance to read through them and see the very important points that were raised there. Sometimes it's as important to write a question as to have it asked and answered, because people can see your voice and your concerns. So I want to thank all of the Chatham House members for putting so many good questions in the list. I think to finish with this idea of business, and as you said, the 10 principles of the Global Compact is a good place to finish. If multinational businesses, which are so important in creating jobs, link those jobs to principles that are progressive, that work towards reducing inequality, work towards providing more universal health, work towards tackling climate change and sustainability, then that's going to create an environment that governments will respond to. I think, as you were saying, Dr. Ban, there. We have, of course, a reminder in the last 2 months of how much money governments can maneuver, however. $10 trillion by some counts of money invented by governments and central banks. So if you could get that partnership between businesses, civil society, and governments really working in the same direction, we could bring about incredible change. we're very grateful for the time you've given us, more than an hour today. Thank you so much, Ban Ki-moon. It's great to have you involved with the elders, with which Chatham House has a very good partnership, and we're thrilled to have you there as Deputy Chair. I think Mary Robinson actually is joining us towards the end of this week as well, so we're going to have quite an elders element here. But I do want to thank the members of our Common Futures conversation, because this idea of linking the experience of people like you and others in the elders and networks that are involved with Chatham House and other groups, and linking them with the young voices that really are driving so much change today, it really is, that could be incredibly powerful. And obviously businesses are looking at the young. The young are the future consumers. In many cases, they're also setting the agenda today. So you've really provoked a very interesting conversation. Thank you for being part of our Centenary Week. We look forward to incorporating some of your ideas along with others at the end of our centenary year, see if we can get some of the best ideas of the year put together. And thank all of our members for joining us today, for asking such good questions, for engaging. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at our next meeting tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye, everyone, and see you soon. Keep safe. Thank you, Dr. Ban. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Niblet, for this opportunity, and congratulations again for this centennial anniversary of Chatham House. I know that there is a Chatham House rule, but in my case, no such rule will.
We didn't read it today. We want to get the ideas out.
You can quote, yeah. Okay,
Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.